Simpson Comanche Jack Stillwell did not reach the spotlight of Buffalo Bill Cody or Wild Bill Hickok, but his name carried weight for one reason. In 1868, at the Battle of Beecher Island, he took on a decisive role. From then on, his path reveals risky choices, unlikely alliances, and a knack for surviving on the frontier. Bill Doolin, a feared figure in the Oklahoma Territory, began his life of crime alongside the Dalton Gang. His name spread across the country when he escaped unscathed from the Coffeyville shootout. Years later, an 1896 cabinet card made by Doherty and Guthrie records the fate that caught up with him and opens the door to the next chapter. At 18 years old, John Wesley Hardin was already leaving his mark on the Old West. The photo dates from 1871. By the time he died in 1895, he had claimed between 27 and 42 lives, a tally that sustained his fame among gunfighters. His trajectory cuts across border towns, railroads, and saloons, and still today sparks curiosity about the price of violence and the fear his name inspired. An albumin photograph captures a turning point in Old West law. Pinkerton agents set out in pursuit of the feared Wild Bunch around 1900. On the left stands Charlie Siringo. Before wearing the badge, he knew dust and cattle as a cowboy in Texas and the New Mexico Territory, and that shaped his hunt. This cabinet card, an undated photograph, was produced by the Pawnee Gallery in the town of Pawnee. It belongs to a moment of ambiguous perceptions about the Oklahoma Territory, caught between colonization expectations and economic uncertainties. In 1896, the Guthrie Daily Leader recorded the prevailing sentiment, "No good exists or can come from Oklahoma." Roy Bean, seen in this cabinet card around 1895, became a symbol of the Old West. Self-proclaimed law west of the Pecos, he served as Justice of the Peace in Langtry, Texas, holding court in his own saloon. His rulings, shaped by pragmatism and local interests, alternated between fines and swift acquittals, generating lasting controversy. Satanta, Kiowa chief, appears in a photo dated August 18, 1868. He wears a peace medal, likely received at the signing of the Medicine Lodge Treaty in 1867. The image records Native presence in federal negotiations and highlights the tensions and agreements that marked U.S. policy during expansion into the Great Plains. Frank Randall, photographer of the Old West, is recognized for capturing some of the earliest images of Geronimo, the Chiricahua Apache leader. In 1884, at the San Carlos Reservation in what was then the Arizona Territory, he produced a series of portraits that show the period of confinement and federal surveillance, a rare visual record of Geronimo's leadership. In March 1886, photographer C.S. Fly of Tombstone, Arizona Territory, accompanied General George Crook on an incursion across the border into Sonora to negotiate with Chiricahua leaders. On site, Fly recorded a series of images, among them a scene of Chiricahua Apache men, women, and children gathered during the talks. George Armstrong Custer, officer of the U.S. 7th Cavalry and a controversial figure of the West, appears in this cabinet card produced by William Howell in New York in April 1876. The image is significant for preceding by 2 months the death of Custer and his men at the Battle of Little Bighorn amid the campaigns against the Plains peoples. McCubbin, collector of historical photographs with verified provenance, encounters a singular case, an image of uncertain authorship. There is no documentary proof linking it to Buckskin Frank Leslie. Still, he sustains the attribution by comparing features, scars, beard, and posture with an authenticated portrait of Leslie from the same era. The first original historical photograph acquired by McCubbin shows Pat Garrett, then sheriff of Lincoln County in the New Mexico Territory. Known for capturing and killing Billy the Kid, he shot him on July 14, 1881 at Fort Sumner, an act that ended the post-Lincoln War pursuit and fixed his place in Western history. Lola Montez, Irish-born and a traveling performer of the 19th century, gained fame with the tarantula dance. In 1853, upon arriving in California during the Gold Rush, She performed it in theaters and mining camps. The choreography simulated expelling a spider from her skirts, a gesture that defied moral norms and drew large crowds with castanets. At 20 years old, John Henry Holliday graduated from the Pennsylvania College of Dental Surgery and began practicing dentistry. The portrait records his adult phase before his turn westward. Years later, already called Doc, he gained notoriety for his role in the shootout near the OK Corral in Tombstone. The change came in search of a drier climate. Called the New Mexico Thieves, the portrayed men appear in a cabinet card, a studio photograph dated around 1880. Academic debate surrounds the identity of the standing man, possibly John Kinney, gang leader dedicated to horse and cattle theft in the New Mexico Territory, active in the 1870s and 1880s. The Texas Rangers, considered the first statewide law enforcement force in the U.S., emerged in the Republic of Texas, still independent, to patrol settlements and border routes. After annexation, their role expanded. In 1874, the government created the Frontier Battalion, uniting 6 ranger companies under centralized command. James Butler Wild Bill Hickok, often pointed to as the first gunfighter of the West, gained fame on July 21, 1865 in Springfield, Missouri, when he killed Dave Tutt in a duel sparked by a debt and a taken watch. The episode set the model of the face-to-face showdown in later imagination and in Hollywood. In 1887, photographer John Grable captured this scene. A cowboy identified in the copyright caption as Fred Pierce, a noted cowboy of Wyoming. The mention suggests local reputation, but his identity remains uncertain. The 1880 censuses of the territory contain no unequivocal records of Fred Pierce in the available documentation. While serving a warrant against Andy Cooper, a horse thief in Holbrook in what was then the Arizona Territory, Apache County Sheriff Commodore Perry Owens faced armed resistance. The clash, brief and witnessed by townspeople on the spot, ended with 3 dead. Cooper himself and brothers Samuel and John Blevins all shot by Owens. Bat Masterson, former scout for the U.S. Army, gained notoriety as an efficient sheriff in frontier towns. He considered Wyatt Earp a respected peer and a reference point of the West. In statements to President Theodore Roosevelt, he maintained that only Earp could accurately recount the events of that period. For him, Earp was the memory. Dated around 1850, this portrait records a man of unknown identity. The daguerreotype, a common medium in the early years of photography, shows a frontiersman of mixed ancestry, likely Metis. Clues in the clothing and framing suggest ties to trade routes and contacts between indigenous and European peoples. A daguerreotype from 1850, among the earliest images of a fur trapper, portrays James P. Beckwourth. The photograph was later included in his autobiography, published in 1856. Beckwourth was born in 1798 in Virginia, the son of an enslaved mother and an overseer of Irish origin. Years later, he would work in the West and among the Crow as a guide and trader. Although buffalo hunting was common in the Old West, visual documentation of hunters is scarce. An exception is this cabinet card dated 1880, possibly made in a traveling studio. The scene shows a hunter with a Sharps rifle, a usual weapon associated with large-scale slaughter on the Great Plains for the hide and bone market. In 1876, the attempted robbery of the Northfield, Minnesota, bank by the James Younger Gang, became a landmark crime of the West. The armed reaction of townspeople foiled the attempt, resulting in deaths and captures during the ensuing escape. After the episode, cartes de visite, then popular, were produced, recording the arrested and at times the dead. Samantha Fallon worked as a businesswoman in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, managing the San Jose House Hotel and a millinery. Her portrait was taken by C.S. Fly in a cabinet card around 1879. Local sources indicate personal ties with central figures of the town where business, sociability, and power intersected. In March 1886, during the negotiations between General George Crook and Geronimo at Canon de los Embudos in northwestern Mexico, C.S. Fly recorded key scenes of the U.S. Apache conflict. In one of them, an Apache appears in a three-piece suit, evidence of intercultural contact and the tension with his people's traditional dress. The death notice of John Wesley Hardin, the well-known Texan outlaw, was blunt. John Wesley Hardin, the famous desperado of Texas, is no more. Issued after the August 1895 episode, it recorded his death at the hands of lawman John Selman in the Acme Saloon in El Paso, Texas, bringing to an end a life of confrontations and escapes. The last known image of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Robert Leroy Parker and Harry Longabaugh, dates to around 1907. Taken in the Bolivian Andes when they lived in exile after escapes through the U.S. and Argentina, the photo highlights the end of their career and the change of setting, from the plains of the West to Andean mining towns. Portrait of John Simpson Chisum, known as the Cattle King, published in 1907 in The Story of the Outlaw by Emerson Hoe. Active in the cattle trade since 1854, Chisum formed a partnership in 1866 with Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving. Along the western routes, they drove large herds to the New Mexico territory, consolidating supply networks. Apache Kid, a historical figure surrounded by controversy, acted among the Apaches in the southwestern United States, in the Arizona Territory. He began as a respected Army scout, mediating contacts and tracking groups. After clashes with authorities, deaths in retaliations, and judicial misunderstandings, he came to be classified as an outlaw.